find that in a particular community, the community members will tell a story around their seed using the diversity wheel. Each crop that falls in a particular segment tells a story. There are many ways of knowing the levels of diversity that a community has. Some of the tools that I used are the diversity wheel, timeline analysis, and biodiversity registers. So at CTDT, we use a lot of the diversity wheel. The diversity wheel has two components, one for crops and one for varieties. We're just going to demonstrate here with a group of farmers, the farmers that we work with, how a diversity wheel is done. So a diversity wheel has 5 compartments. So the segment in the center represents the lost varieties. The other segments can be put as people desire. The other ones that are there shows the crops that are grown by many farmers on a large scale. The other one will show crops that are grown by many farmers on a small scale. The other one will show crops that are grown by a few farmers on a small scale. The other ones will show crops that are grown by few farmers but on a large scale. So then how do the farmers decide which crop goes where? This takes a lot of discussion, and the knowledge about crops is with the farmers. So we're going to demonstrate. We imagine that we've already had our discussion and we want to understand the levels of diversity in our community. Remember, every community had a wide range of crops. Some have disappeared over time, others are still there. So each segment of the diversity wheel tells a story about a particular crop. For the lost crops, they are lost because maybe they were affected by climate change. People have stopped growing them for a certain reason. For the crops that are grown by few farmers but on a large scale, we tell a story of a crop that is grown by big commercial farmers and cannot be managed to be grown by large farmers. So we'll start. We have a variety of crops here, and then we'll ask the farmers where each crop belongs. They'll decide amongst themselves, and then they'll know where to place each crop in the segments. The importance of doing this is to ensure that farmers are understanding what is happening to their varieties, to their crops. So I'll ask the farmers, we'll start with the lost crops. I'll ask them to pick crops that belong to the segment that represent lost crops. So finger millet is not something that you would easily find in this community. So farmers will define it as a lost crop. So it is a lost crop because there are so many factors that have influenced the crop to get lost in the community. So when we do this, then the farmers will also discuss why has the crop been lost in this segment. They'll understand the challenges that come with the crop. They'll also understand the importance of the crop. Maybe 30 years back, they'll start asking themselves, but how did it help the communities? Was it important for us? How did our forefathers use? When they are doing this discussion, it is very important that they engage in this discussion because they'll find something that is very important. Maybe it's very nutritious. One of the uses would be that it's very nutritious, or it's something that is beneficial for their food and nutrition security. So once the farmers understand the crop through the discussions using the diversity wheel, then they can also discuss whether they want to restore the crop in the community, if they think it's now very important for the climate. Would you want to restore it? So the major activity that can take place around a lost crop is restoration. Where do we find the sources of material for lost crops? We go to the National Gene Bank, or we look around in places where these crops are still grown. So a lost crop in a community doesn't mean that it's lost in other communities. It might be lost in that community, but not lost in the surrounding communities. So we go to the next segment. We'll discuss crops that are grown by many farmers on a large scale. Mostly the crops that are found in this segment are those crops that are staple foods that people use a lot in their livelihoods. Crops that bring income to their households. So like the maize and sunflower, you find that it is grown by many farmers, yes, and it's grown on a large scale because that's the staple food that people eat. Which other crops there are grown by many farmers? So you find that the crops that are here are those crops that are grown by commercial farmers, crops that cannot be grown by the small-scale farmers. So they will not have any business to do with these crops because most of these crops will be grown under irrigation. We'll go to the next segment where most of the farmer-led seed system crops, underutilized crops or threatened crops will appear. So a few farmers will grow these crops on small plots. These crops are also threatened anytime they can go in the lost crop segment. So the farmers will also interrogate what is changing these crops to be found in this segment. So you find that maybe the climate is changing. You find that maybe they are being replaced by hybrid crops. So they're getting threatened. They're being threatened by pests and diseases. So there are so many factors that will push a crop in a particular segment. So many farmers will grow crops on small plots because they are the crops that they are using for their household food and nutrition security. The few farmers will grow them on a small crop because they're still very important and they still need to hold on to them. So these two segments, any of these crops can fall into any segment depending on the community that you're analyzing the diversity and what is happening to the diversity. So this is the task about the diversity wheel.